Welcome to Zoom In, Zoom Out, your global look at news from Taiwan. I'm Rik Glauert. Taiwan's President Lai Ching-te has embarked upon his first official overseas trip since he took office. He's visiting the Pacific. Lai has made a stopover in Hawaii, and he's also visiting 3 of Taiwan's remaining official diplomatic allies in the world, making stops at the Marshall Islands, Tuvalu and Palau. Officials say this is a trip that is going to focus on collaborating in areas like sustainability, climate change and democracy. To further discuss Taiwan's place in the Indo-Pacific, today we're joined with Wagi Payan. She's a professor of Indigenous Studies at Taiwan's National Dongwha University. Wagi Payan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi Rik, thanks for having me here today.
So we want to zoom in on President Lai's big trip. He's visiting some of these small Pacific Island nations, the Marshall Islands, Tuvalu, Palau. Can you tell us a little bit about these countries and what they mean for Taiwan?
So in these 3 small Pacific nations, these countries, they're all Austronesian peoples, and Taiwan is also one of the Austronesian family. So Austronesians people are actually, well, it's a linguistic and cultural concept, and it's referring to the communities that speak Austronesian languages and shared related traditions. And the Pacific Islanders, it's a similar concept but not really interchangeable, and they are defined graphically and culturally. It's referring to the people who are inhabiting the Pacific Islands.
Just for our international audience, could you just explain a bit about the relationship between Taiwan's indigenous people, their history here, and how they sit with the rest of the population?
So about 4,000 or 6,000 ago, Taiwanese indigenous people have been here, and then in history we have been colonized by lots of different countries, Western countries, and also Japan and the KMT government. And so in a way we share similar history with other Austronesian people. We've all been colonized before. However, while all these other nations, they have, the majority of people are indigenous, we only account for 2.5 in our country. The majority people in Taiwan are Han Chinese people, and they are the dominant culture in Taiwan. Actually, when I went to Hawaii this June, and when I met other Pacific Islanders, it's really fun and interesting that we try to speak our languages and see the similarities. So, for example, the eyes are the same, 5 are the same, or moon are the same, and that's really interesting. And we were so surprised to find out this. And also, for example, lots of Austronesian people and Pacific Islanders, we do have the tradition of having betel nuts. So one of my friends, also indigenous person, the first thing he did when we got to Hawaii was trying to find local betel nuts and then to share the similarity, it tastes a bit different, or does it taste the same with the betel nuts in Taiwan?
So among the delegation, President Lai is taking Taiwan's Indigenous Affairs Minister. Why do you think he might be on this trip to the Pacific?
I think his participation in this trip is really pivotal, and Minister Ljaucu, he is an indigenous person himself, and he's good at is well experienced in cultural exchange and cultural preservation and language preservation, all these aspects. And so by having him there, in a way, he can share all his experiences with all these nations. In another way, it also shows that Taiwanese government cares about Taiwanese indigenous people. And I think that's also a challenge here. They have to show that they are not merely using Taiwanese indigenous people as a tool to break through the diplomatic tension or pressure, and they have to show that they have a genuine commitment on indigenous affairs. So, for example, they care about the sovereignty or the subjectivity. So by bringing him in somehow shows that we are willing to do this. It's also a challenge for them how well they can present their commitment.
How do you think connections like these, like indigenous people and Pacific Island nations, how can this help Taiwan and indigenous people have a greater voice on the world stage?
I think them using the cultural aspect and maybe somehow emotional aspect is a way. I think maybe this is the strategy they're having this time, to try to tell them that we are a country, we treasure indigenous people's voice, we value your multiculturalism, and we value your subjectivity and sovereignty, and somehow this value-based strategy is very different from the economic helps that China could offer. And this is, we're trying to use a very different strategy from China, and with limited resources and the attention from the world. So I think this is probably one of the reasons that President Lai would like to bring Minister Ljaucu this time.
We're going to take this opportunity to kind of zoom out a bit and talk about issues of identity. And I think it's really interesting that you were just talking about your experience as an indigenous person visiting the Pacific. As I mentioned, our audience might not know that much about Taiwan's indigenous people. Could you tell us a bit about your identity? You know, you're an indigenous Taiwanese.
I'm actually half Han Chinese. My mother is Han Chinese, and my dad is a Taiwanese indigenous people. We are Dayao, live around the mountains. And this is also a very interesting topic, because when I was in Hawaii meeting all the Pacific Islanders or Austronesian people, most of them, they all have connection to the ocean. But Dayao, like me, we're more familiar with mountains. So in a way, we left Taiwan maybe 3,000, 4,000 years ago to all the other islands. However, some of Taiwanese indigenous people moved up to the mountains. We kind of lost the connection with, or maybe originally we don't have the connections with the ocean. So when I was in Hawaii meeting all the people there, I remember clearly there was a people from Tahiti who asked me, "So, Miss, have you started building your own boat?" And I was speechless at that point, because I couldn't really explain in that venue and in a very short time explaining how come some Taiwanese indigenous people are less connected to the ocean.
You mentioned the Festival of Pacific Arts and Culture that took place in Hawaii in the summer. Could you tell us a little bit about what you got up to there, and were there any key moments or things that you remember?
It's Festival of Pacific Arts and Culture. It happens every 4 years. And this year there are 28 countries participated in this festival. Among this, there is a person whose name is Charles Nainoa Thompson. His speech left a deep impression on me. He is a native Hawaiian navigator and the president of the Polynesia Voyaging Society. And he was the first Hawaiian navigator who practiced the ancient Polynesian art of navigating since the 14th century. And he began his speech by discussing the migration of the Austronesian peoples. And the first thing he said was actually, "Thank you, Taiwan, for leaving with the courage 4,000 years ago." And that was really touching at that point. And just like the host in the first pack at the ceremony, opening and closing ceremony, they all recognize Taiwan as Pacific Islanders, although we are not technically Pacific Islanders, but they use this ways of saying we are a family, even though somehow you're in Asia. And he also mentioned lots of things like, again and again, saying we Pacific Islanders, we should come together. We're a family, we should become one single voice since we are the ocean people. The ocean we collectively owned are bigger than the land other nations have. So if we work together to fight climate change or cultural preservation, we are strong and we should be able to do it. His talk is really have a very good impression on me.
It's really interesting that Taiwan is kind of the beginning of that huge migration. You know, what is it like now in the 21st century with all of the technology and you can fly to Hawaii, but for people to kind of mention that your people, indigenous people of Taiwan, are from the beginning of this huge population covering a huge amount of the world. How did it feel when you said those words?
I think I nearly cried at that point, because somehow you would feel, as I said, we sometimes feel we don't belong to Taiwan because we are not, our situation now, sometimes you feel lonely now, like no one could understand us. However, when I was there, when our people were there, when people say those kind of things on stage, we suddenly feel we are accepted and we are incorporated, we are within the big family. That was really powerful and magical moment, actually.
Taiwan's indigenous people have obviously had a very difficult history and have been discriminated against and still face stigma. And in the recent years, there has been, more done to give them more voice and to protect languages, culture. Why might indigenous people want to also reconnect with other indigenous people around the world, including in the Pacific? What does it bring Taiwanese people here?
Here, I would like to borrow my colleague, Professor Awimona's words. He said that we Taiwanese indigenous people, we are in double marginality. For instance, in Taiwan, we are not the dominant culture, we are suppressed. And international level, we are also facing the pressure from China. We are usually invisible. And however, if we are connected to Pacific Islanders or Austronesian people, because we have shared cultural and linguistic ties, and if we connect to them, or we can say we return to the family, that somehow helps our identity and it gives us more confidence and also make us feel we belong somewhere and our voice could be heard.
I think you mentioned it earlier, but is there a danger that Taiwan, using its indigenous population to kind of promote national identity, for example, on this trip, taking Indigenous Affairs Minister or during National Day events and this sort of thing, is there ever a sense that this is kind of an inauthentic recognition or promotion of Taiwanese indigenous people?
It can be a worry because we don't want to be like we don't want to be used as a tool or like a pawn in order to solve the issues in global aspect. So I do think that the government, or maybe this trip, they somehow need to show that they are committed to recognize our sovereignty and our subjectivity and try to think from a different perspective, not only just Han Chinese perspective. And in this way, we can work together. We don't need to be the same, but we can both be respect and we can work on these issues together. So hopefully in the future, once people know more about our past, our history, they can be more understanding or willing to know more about our culture deeply, not just the performances, not just singing, dancing, or sports, that's their stereotypes. Hope by the work of governments, one day, it's like the concept or the idea of ethnic mainstreaming. And so one day people can understand us more, and then there will be less discrimination or misunderstanding between us.
Well, Wagi Payan, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been really interesting to talk to you.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for watching Zoom In, Zoom Out. I've been Rik Glauert. For more stories from Taiwan and around the world, you can check out our website or follow us on social media. Take care, and we'll see you next time.